All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for this press conference with the independent international fact-finding mission on the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're pleased to have with us today all three members of the mission who wanted to speak to you following their first oral report to the Human Rights Council and the interactive dialogue which followed earlier this morning here in Geneva. So we have with us in the middle Sara Hossain, the chair of the mission, and just to my left, Viviana Krsticevic, excuse me, and on the far left of the table is Shaheen Sardar. So without further ado, I'll turn to Sara for opening remarks, and then we'll go to you for your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to everyone who's here in the room and also everyone who's here virtually for joining us today. Please note that this event is being recorded and it will be made available publicly afterwards. As you'll be aware, this morning at the Human Rights Council, we presented the first oral update of the fact-finding mission on Iran. And the presentation was followed by our first interaction with the Human Rights Council, with all of the member states present there and with the NGOs who made submissions. As you know, this fact-finding mission was established by the Human Rights Council in November 2022 through a special session and a resolution after the nationwide protest that followed the death of Jina Mahsa Amini while in the custody of the morality police in Tehran for alleged breaches of the compulsory veiling laws. We were appointed by the President of the Council in December 2022, a month after that, and we were tasked by the Council to investigate alleged human rights violations in the Islamic Republic of Iran related to the protest that started on the 16th of September after the death of Jina Mahsa Amini. We were also tasked to collect, consolidate, and analyze evidence of such violations and to preserve it, including in view of cooperation and legal proceedings. We are due to present a comprehensive report with all our findings to the Human Rights Council in March 2024. Given the ongoing nature of our mandate, we've reported to the Council this morning on some of our concerns regarding recent developments, starting with those affecting women and girls who've been at the forefront of the protests in Iran and also at the center of our mandate.
Good afternoon. My name is Viviana Krsticevic. First and foremost, we have expressed concerns over the domestic investigation into the death in custody of Jina Mahsa Amini, and in particular over the fact that to date, her family's right to truth and justice remains unfulfilled. Domestic investigations in her case have fallen short of international human rights norms and standards, and moreover, efforts to shed light on the circumstances of her death have been hindered. In this context, we wish to highlight the continued detention of two women journalists who first reported on the event, Niloufar Hamedi and Elahi Mohammadi. We have also identified major risks of further erosion of women's and girls' rights in Iran. We have expressed concern about the continuous repression of women and girls opposing forced veiling and the reported use of facial recognition technologies to identify and arrest them. Alarming information according to which students are being suspended from their studies or banned from dormitories for their defiance of the compulsory veiling law continue to emerge. Businesses are reported to have been fined or closed for non-enforcement of these laws as well. Another area of deep concern are the two draft bills which have been recently placed for consideration before Parliament with the view of increasing punishments to women and girls found in breach of forced veiling provisions, including flogging and arrests. To conclude on this section, just 2 months after the protests occurred, a series of alleged poisonings started in dozens of schools in 28 provinces. Reports that this might have been orchestrated as a means to punish girls or deter them from involvement in the protests are being duly investigated in the framework of our mandate.
Thank you, Viviana. Good afternoon. I'm Shaheen Sardar and I'm a member of the fact-finding mission on Iran. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. Picking up from what my colleagues have said, you will, of course, as a journalist yourself, you will have noticed that news of the protests in Iran no longer appear to dominate daily news bulletins or indeed the headlines as it did in November. However, I would like to say to you that allegations of human rights violations in this connection continue to be heard and received, and the aftermath of those protests in the form of intimidation of families and of reprisals continue unabated. 22,000 people, as reported by the government of Iran, have been pardoned in connection with the protests. This suggests that many more were detained or charged. Unfortunately, no disaggregated data exists on the nature of the accusations against these people or on those convicted, still detained, or charged for their involvement in the protests. Of further concern to us are the conditions of these pardons, namely that protesters were reportedly made to express remorse and to effectively admit guilt through signing written undertakings pledging that they would not commit similar crimes in the future. We have reported to the Human Rights Council that among those remaining in detention are at least 17 journalists for their alleged reporting on the protests, alongside many human rights defenders and lawyers defending these protesters. We've also expressed serious concern about continuous reports of harassment of family members seeking justice for their loved ones, including for children who were killed in the protests. Since November 2022, at least 26 individuals have reportedly been sentenced to death in connection with the protests, and dozens more have been charged with or face offenses carrying the death penalty. 7 men have already been executed following these proceedings, marred by serious allegations of fair trial violations, including confessions extracted under torture. We have called on the Iranian authorities to stop these executions of individuals convicted and sentenced to death in connection with the protests, and to make available to us the judicial files, the evidence, and the judgments regarding each of these persons. We have also called on the government of Iran to release all those detained for exercising their legitimate right to peaceful assembly and for reporting on the protests.
The fact-finding mission attaches great importance to engaging with the Iranian people. To this end, we communicated with the government of Iran at the outset of our appointment, seeking access to the country and to be speaking to people inside, including speaking to government officials and public authorities. We also have reviewed reports produced by the government of Iran. 37 have been produced to date, which we've seen. And just yesterday, we met with the recently appointed special committee appointed by the Iranian president, entitled the, quote, Special Committee to Investigate the 2022 Unrests, unquote. However, we have not received any direct response from the government of Iran to our request to enter the country, meet with people there, nor have we received any responses to the specific inquiries we've sent. We sent 7 letters to date, 1 a month, with detailed inquiries about a number of issues, including arrest, detentions, the death penalty, the treatment of women, the compulsory hijab laws, the treatment of children, amongst others, of course, the treatment of protesters during the protests. So we remain hopeful of getting a response, but it's important for us to get that. But the most important thing for us is to be able to communicate with the people of Iran and get to the questions that we've been asked to investigate, get to some answers regarding those questions. But as we stressed this morning, the people of Iran, including women and girls, have absolutely fundamental rights to equality, to truth, to justice, to accountability, and to reparations. And we're determined to make every effort to support them on this journey to achieving their legitimate aspirations. Thank you very much for your attention. Please, any of you who have questions, anyone in the room or outside, I'd be happy to take them. If you could just identify yourself when you speak as well, please.
Afshin from Iran International. For past more than 200 days, what was the main challenges you have faced in the mechanism, and what do you expect from international community, how they could support you? As it's been obviously countries like of China showed that they don't support the mechanism.
Maybe we could take a few questions if that's okay. Would that be all right? Oh, sure, go ahead.
And you've mentioned that you've received 37 reports from Islamic Republic authorities, and as you know, they have reportedly they said they said that they don't have any legitimacy for the fact-finding missions. How hopeful are you about their future engagements?
If, Sara, if we could just go ahead and respond to the
Okay,
question.
sure,
We'll just
of
take them
course.
one by one.
Okay, sure, I'll do that
Clear
then.
in front of us.
We have faced a number of challenges. First and foremost is not having access to the country, because obviously the vast majority of people that we need to speak to and the sites that we need to see and material that we need to look at is inside the country. So the lack of cooperation to date is a significant challenge. The fact we haven't received responses to the queries set out to the government is also a very significant challenge of the same kind. In relation to, because we have begun our investigations, we have been able to speak to people. We are receiving submissions directly, and we are also going out there to collect further information. Another significant issue for us in that respect is in relation to the security and safety of the people who speak with us. We are aware, as we reported this morning, and as you said to you, that there are serious issues in terms of harassment and intimidation of those who were involved in the protests, either directly as protesters or those who have sought to assist protesters, honestly assist, but in terms of reporting on the issues or in terms of providing representation to protesters subsequently as lawyers or as human rights defenders. So that's the context in which conducting investigations is very difficult. There's also an issue of disinformation and considerable disinformation which is available. There were comments about disinformation from a number of the member states that you heard this morning. I think it's a huge concern for anyone trying to get at the truth from our perspective also, that all kinds of information is being put out there and all kinds of narratives are there, which also need to be gone through in terms of us trying to determine the responses to the questions that we're investigating. In terms of the international community, I think first and foremost, we think it's critical for the international community to remain engaged with this issue. Again, you heard a great deal this morning about a great deal of sort of polarized response. I think for us, as a mandate that is concerned with human rights issues, and particularly with the application of human rights law, I think we acknowledge the world is in a very polarized state. We understand there are many challenges, but it's critical that we have to uphold the universality of human rights, and we have to uphold the mechanisms that exist in this very polarized and difficult world to try and establish human rights principles, establish where violations have occurred, and take action. In view of the issues we mentioned around security and safety, we also think the international community has a major role to play in terms of ensuring protection for victims, witnesses, and sources, because we know that the threats and intimidation that is occurring is occurring within the territories of Iran, but also occurring to individuals outside. For people who are able to leave, they need places of safety to go to, and that is a place where the international community can play a role. Finally, we mentioned that we have a function, one of our core aspects of our mandate is the collection of evidence. And so this is another area in which we would seek to cooperate with members of the international community in terms of ensuring the preservation of evidence, as well as the gathering of evidence, which is the process we're currently involved in. We have supplementary points from colleagues.
Good. Shall I take the second question that you had on how hopeful you felt that we were in light of the fact that the government of Iran is not cooperating with us, and to what extent the international community can be of assistance? Well, basically, in this day and age, if you look at commissions of inquiries and fact-finding missions, we're not the exception. It's not only the fact-finding mission for Iran that has not had cooperation from the country. So we're not alone in that. And often countries may be reluctant to give access. However, there are multiple avenues of reaching primary sources and secondary sources and corroborating them. And in terms of acquiring the kind of information that is available out there, we believe that our impartiality, our professionalism, and our independence, and the quality of our work, and the fact that we have a very high threshold when it comes to, and we're obviously subscribing to the international standards in this regard, we feel that our work will speak for itself, and that we do feel that we're hoping also, and we're confident that the work, when we put it together, will be out there in the public domain, will inspire and attract respect and legitimacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaheen. Did you have something to add?
Just to reiterate that we are looking for different ways of encouraging access to Iran through visiting the country and having a direct conversation with authorities and victims and witnesses, lawyers and journalists in the country. There are other ways in which we are strongly pursuing access and information. We have looked at the reports of the 37 reports that you mentioned of the government. We've made detailed questions about 20 of them that we furnished to the government through a letter that we submitted recently. And we are expecting the government's response. So far, we haven't had a lot of luck, but we are still confident that our good faith efforts will have some level of response. And it is on the best interest of the government itself to dialogue with us, because we are accessing information from many other sources and victims around the world and in the country.
Thank you, Viviana. Okay, we can take another question from the room on this side.
Yeah, thank you. Jeremy Lange, I'm working for the French Public Radio. I've got 3 questions for you. The first one will be, maybe that's something that's been said in the reports. Apologies if I'm mistaking here, but how many witnesses, people have you been talking to? Direct witnesses, protesters? You mentioned in the report that you had difficulties contacting them because of the policy of the Iranian authorities regarding the internet and the networks. So how many people basically? Second question is, you mentioned that you talked to the Iranian committee that was set up by the authorities yesterday. I'd like to know, I'd like to have a taste of what has been said. Was it productive in a way? And the last question would be about the bills that might pass in the parliament. I'd like you to elaborate a bit on those bills. Do they complement each other, or is there a difference between the 2 versions, and when could they pass in the parliament? Thank you.
Let me start with well, I think on the numbers, we can't give you exact numbers right now, because I think we're in the process of conducting investigations. We'd rather not share the exact numbers of how many people we've spoken to and where and so on. But it is ongoing. We have started, and we're taking interviews in different means and methods. In terms of the committee, we did meet with the special committee, and we were able to have discussions yesterday about their procedures and methods, and we got some responses around that. We were interested in learning whether they would be putting out public calls, whether they would be having any public hearings, how they would engage the public in general, how they would meet the requirements, the minimum requirements regarding any domestic investigation machinery, which include the promptness requirement arguably is in question, given it's just been set up very recently. But how would they meet the requirements regarding transparency and independence and impartiality and effectiveness in terms of the thoroughness in terms of their processes? So we essentially asked those questions. We haven't yet engaged on the details of any incidents, inquiries with them. It was our first meeting with them. And we, as I said, we've said, and we keep on saying today, that we would like to hear all sides, and we would be open to receiving information and materials and responses from not only the government of Iran, but of course from the special committee, since it is looking into these incidents. But we will see after today in terms of further communications and contacts and how that proceeds. In terms of the bills, would either of you like to go on the bills?
Yeah,
The two bills, yes, please start off.
Yes, so basically, the state of Iran is one amongst maybe a couple more in the world that have laws enforcing a specific dress code for women and penalizing it if it's not followed. Yeah? So in the case of Iran, there is the morality police that has the remit to oversee whether women in public spaces are covering themselves properly, is how they call it, a proper hijab and an improper hijab. These are not our terms, please note. These are the terms that are officially used in Iran by government authorities. Now, since the protests, it came to light that two bills were presented to the Majlis. They are at various stages of consultation and various stages of, in various sort of procedural stages. So we're not able to anticipate when exactly and in what form finally these laws will be, these draft bills will be converted into law. However, what is of interest to the FFM and in relation to women and girls is regarding the fact that the hijab laws are going to become more stringent and will be penalized. And that is where our interest lies. So one set of laws is putting out in quite some detail the nature of these hijab laws, how there's a process, there will be a warnings issued, and if the warnings, if after a few warnings they're not heeded, then there will be penalties. There could be people could lose their jobs. Businesses and institutions who have employees who do not wear the proper hijab might have to shut down, and so on and so forth. So one set of laws is trying to regulate the hijab. The other law, as I understand it, is some kind of amendments in provisions of an existing law, and in there would be penalizing through the penalties for this, for not conforming to the dress code. Do you see what I mean? So one is setting out very clearly what the hijab is meant to be. The other one will then, and both will then be used in tandem. So not wearing the proper hijab, in inverted commas, will be a criminal offense, and there will be penalties that will be attracted as a result of that. Thank you.
I think the concern is also, if I may add, in relation to the nature of the penalties. Some of the penalties are clearly what would constitute inhumane punishment under international law, such as flogging. There are also concerns that imposing detention for these kinds of occurrences would constitute arbitrary detention. There's also an attempt through this proposed legislation to essentially privatize enforcement of these hijab laws so that private actors would become responsible for any individual who doesn't comply with the laws. So someone in a shop, someone operating transport would become responsible for a person using that is not complying with the compulsory hijab laws. I think a very serious concern is that in terms of that this hijab law wouldn't just violate the right to equality, which it clearly would and does, as it currently exists as well, but it would not only violate the rights to civil political rights of women, but it would also violate their rights to economic and social rights. So it would impact on their access to education, it would impact on their access to employment, it would also impact on their access to health in terms of their access to public spaces. So I think the other concern in terms of, not only in terms of what would happen if these were to come in place, but the fact these laws are all being proposed in a context where so much concern was raised through the protest precisely about the application of these laws is very deeply disturbing. And the process itself, the timeline for adoption of the laws is not clear. We've been informed by some of the people we've spoken to that some people, some organizations have consulted on this legislation. It's not clear who and what and how, and it's not clear what those consultations consist of either, and what's being taken into consideration and what's not.
Maybe to add that one of the laws also increases the punishments for those inciting others to remove their veil. So there's a punishment for those that act in solidarity, and for issues of free expression, which we believe that we need to investigate to see if these laws, the laws as they are, and the reforms to the law can create a chilling effect on freedom of expression and protest and acts of solidarity.
Thank you, Viviana. We'll take another question from this side.
I'm Benjamin Luis from Radio Télévision Suisse, the Swiss National Radio. Thank you for your update first. And we have seen this morning at the Council how it can be very difficult to even hold a diplomatic discussion, a diplomatic dialogue on this issue. I'd like to know a bit more in details if you have, apart from not being granted access to Iran, if you have encountered any impediments, threats, difficulties in your role as investigators. Thank you.
We are concerned and investigating issues of targeted retaliation and intimidation of family members, victims, journalists, lawyers inside and outside Iran. And those allegations and situations can create a chilling effect that can interfere with our duty to investigate and get the necessary information so that victims have the truth that the Human Rights Council is mandated us to establish.
I think another point is about the online communication. So that's also an issue in terms of the blocking or slowing of the internet and the difficulty of even using secure communications channels to communicate with people.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a question from on this side or the...
Thank you very much. Councillor Naji, I'm with the BBC Persian television in London. I have a few questions to some of you. First, with Sara Hossain. This is a very big job, it seems to me. And already you started the job, but there seems to be a lot more to do. Are you confident that in the period until March you can actually do the job, or do you need more time to do justice to this thing? And secondly, what happens if you don't get access to Iran? what would be consequences for you as this fact-finding mission, A, and B, for Iran in terms of international law? Obviously, the UN is asking Iran to give you access to the country, and they seem to be sort of, you know, turning a blind eye to that. Viviana Krsticevic, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned in your introductory a bit now that you were trying to investigate the circumstances of the death of Massa, and you were hindered, you said. Can you explain how you were hindered in this job by the Iranians? And one other question I had. Shaheen, Iranians seem to be suggesting that this is politically motivated thing, and they don't seem to be sort of playing ball, judging by the speech by the Iranian representative today. What do you say to that? That this whole thing is a charade, is cooked by the Western countries to pressure other countries, including Iran? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yes, it is a very big job, and it's not made easier by the circumstances of not having access currently. At the moment, we're trying to just push ahead with the investigations. And so I think I wouldn't say right now that we don't think we can conclude by March, but I think there may well be considerations about whether we can report as comprehensively as you would wish to by March. And I think we would have to make that assessment shortly before we reach that point. I just wanted to reaffirm, though, I think another aspect of the work we're doing, which perhaps needs to be clarified, is that we are working quite independently. The Council has mandated us, but we're not a part of the Council. And we're also not a part of the United Nations, any particular office or machinery. We're completely independent. And so whatever the challenges and whatever the kinds of the kind of conversation we heard partly this morning, which seemed to be for many, there seemed to be some non-engagement with the questions that we were asked to address. We will continue to look exactly at what we've been mandated to do, which is, have there been human rights violations? Can we come to satisfactory findings based on the standard of the methodology that is the standard methodology for conducting these kinds of human rights investigations, which is now well established across a number of jurisdictions. And I think it's important to look at the fact that this kind of fact-finding machinery has not been rejected in every aspect by even the countries that spoke today in negative terms. They have accepted fact-finding mechanisms in other contexts as well. So I think we need to also explore that situation and see whether there's any sort of lack of consistency in that approach.
And there are difficulties in investigating Massa's case, and we can say very clearly that the detention of those that reported on the death of Massa and other actions that do not facilitate the work of lawyers, journalists, and the legitimate efforts of family members to search for the truth are ways of hindering the investigation. In the case of the fact-finding mission itself, we have asked the government for specific information, including forensic information, access to authorities, and documentary information that we haven't received that would make our job easier. And but we expect to have a full account of what happened to Massa, as well as conclusive determinations on how the government responded to her death.
Thank you for your question, sir. Your question reminds me of the questions that I'm confronted with as a legal academic teaching human rights. Every second student of mine talks about how political human rights are. So to think that human rights do not have underpinnings of politics, I think would not be fair. But what are those politics? Are they the politics of human rights, or are they the politics for human rights? And I think that's the distinction that we would really like to draw in the FFM Iran. For us, we're for human rights. We're for the people on the ground. So we distinguish our positions from those who might want to use the politics of human rights to undermine the human rights of people, of the vulnerable, of the voiceless. So I believe that whilst you heard, and we've all heard the position of some countries regarding the FFM, the bottom line is that 30 for a country and its organizations to generate 37 rather copious documents trying to explain the situation of human rights since the protests and at the protests does speak to the fact that whether it's the politics of human rights or for human rights, whether this is a politicized exercise or not, the reality is that they're as much engaged with it as we are. And as I mean that the government of Iran has invested the time and energy and resources to generate 37 reports and as many inquiries. And now they have also generated, and in inverted commas, the president of the government of Iran has got this special committee on the 2022 unrests, quote unquote. I'd like to please make the point that I'm quoting the official title of the report, and it's not our wording. Now, the fact that all of that has been done, and there are terms of reference, and it's out in the public domain.
Sorry, the title was?
The title was the Special Committee on the 2022 unrests.
It's a bit long. The Special Committee to investigate the 2022.
Yeah. But that's so the fact that all of those efforts are being made does mean that it's not simply shutting the door, and it's not simply saying it's political and we're not engaging. So yes, there is a lot at stake here, and it's quite understandable that there are political costs to this and costs to constituencies at home and abroad. But we also believe that whatever is being said, it's the position of the FFM Iran that we are completely an independent, impartial body. We do not take dictations from anybody, whether it's states or institutions. We have been mandated by the Human Rights Council, but we are completely independent of it. And that we have developed standards and methods of work to the highest international standards. And that we do believe, as I said earlier, that our work will speak for itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaheen. Let's take one question online from Laurent Sierra from the Swiss News Agency. Laurent, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. A bunch of questions. First, a few months ago, the UN Special Rapporteur on Iran, Javaid Rehman, reached a conclusion that the behavior of the security forces towards the demonstrators after Mahsa Amini's death amounted to crimes against humanity. I know that it's very early and that your report is due to be released in March, but you have already gathered the indication that could go in the same direction. Then secondly, did that meeting yesterday with the special committee take place in Geneva? And then thirdly, as you touched on the retaliations, have you had any indication that people that might have already collaborated with you might have been detained because of that? Thank you.
In relation to the special rapporteur, I mean, I should clarify perhaps that these are complementary mandates. I think you heard a number of the member states today speaking about what they saw as parallel mandates and overcommittal of resources and time into setting up parallel mandates on the same issue. So these are not really parallel mandates, they're complementary mandates. They have very different processes and very different functions. First of all, the SR has a research and advocacy function, essentially. We do not, we have a purely investigative function. Secondly, the SR deals with all human rights violations occurring in Iran. It doesn't have a temporal limitation, doesn't have any other limitation on him. We are looking at the alleged human rights violations occurring in relation to the protests that started on the 16th of September 2022. We are able to look at patterns of conduct. So to that extent, we do have a wider frame of reference, but essentially it's what's happened since 16th September onwards. And finally, distinctively from the special rapporteur, we have the opportunity to collect and gather and preserve evidence for the purpose of future legal proceedings. They're very, very separate processes. There's really no issue about running in parallel at all. And for that reason, because we are in an investigative process, we are just, as a previous one of the previous questioners mentioned, we are still very much at the earlier stages of our investigation process. So I think we wouldn't comment right now on our findings and analysis. We'd ask you to wait until our final report for that. In terms of the issue of retaliations, yeah, there are retaliations that have been reported to us ongoing inside the country, and for some of those who are outside also, who are fearing and aware of actions taken against their family members. And those are issues we're looking into specifically. We have said repeatedly that we will be very, that is a challenge for us also in terms of going forward with our own work, that we're very mindful that we should do no harm in the course of our own investigations, that us speaking to somebody should not put them at further risk. And there are many reasons to worry at the moment that that is a genuine problem in terms of gathering evidence right now. Yeah, and sorry, on the special committee, I'm sorry, you had another question. Yes, we met with them online. We didn't meet with them in person.
Okay, thank you. Let's take another question from the room on this side.
Yeah, I forgot to ask you about the surveillance that you were mentioning in the report. Is it something new? I mean, was it set up after the protests, the installation of cameras to watch if women are indeed wearing the veil? Is it something that you've noticed after the protests and it has increased since then, or was it something that was already in place in Iran?
Well, this is something that we are investigating. We have these allegations and of specific cases where, following statements in social media, women have been either summoned or fined or called to the morality police. We are in the process of looking carefully at issues of surveillance and how online harassment could have happened or not happened in the context of the protests and subsequent to the protests, in dealing with the choices of women of abiding or not abiding with the compulsory veiling laws, as well as with expressing solidarity with protesters or yeah.
Sorry, can I just add one point to, I think, two earlier points that were raised by the last speaker and an earlier one about this engagement with the special committee and also with the material that we've seen that the government of Iran has produced. So I think if you can clarify two issues. One is that our process requires us to look at what the government of Iran has to say on this matter and what public authorities in Iran have to say on this matter, as well, of course, as what people in Iran have to say on this matter. The next question is, how is that assessed? And under what, in relation to what standards do we examine that? So we have seen these 37 reports. Viviana, I think, also mentioned earlier that we have actually sent back a number of questions regarding those reports, which we are awaiting a response to. The point is, those reports have to be assessed in the context of international human rights law to see whether the kinds of responses that have been provided are consistent with that or not. Similarly, with the special committee, it's a domestic mechanism, but domestic mechanisms may or may not comply with international standards. If they don't comply with international standards, and that was a question that we will certainly address, that it's then been found wanting. And as I mentioned, the parameters on which we'll make that assessment are whether the special committee has been established with promptness, whether its responses are prompt, whether it is thorough, whether it is critically independent and impartial, and whether it provides effective responses. So this is an assessment that is ongoing. We will look into what they produce, their activities, any other materials we have about their work, but we will continue to try to speak with them and to speak with other government authorities as well as with the special committee. So I think the question of communicating and contacting and seeking information is different from how we assess that and how we analyze that and under what standards.
Thank you, Sara. Do we have any more questions from the room or online? Just give it a second. Okay. So with that, we end the press conference today. Thank you all for joining us here, and thank you all for joining us online. Have a good day. Thanks.